Gertrude Fossen was born on September 19, 1928 in Indianapolis, Indiana to Hugh Marcus Sr. and Molly. She was the third of 6 children born into a working-class household, and from early in her childhood, the Fossen home was struggling financially while carrying a lot of emotional tension. Despite that, Gertrude was said to have had a meaningful and strong bond with her father. Her relationship with her mother, however, was a different matter entirely. From early on, her mother treated Gertrude with hostility, and as financial pressures mounted during the Great Depression, her frustrations sharpened. By this time, any emotional stability Gertrude's father provided had also begun to fade. Then, on October 5, 1939, when Gertrude was 10 years old, her father collapsed and died from a sudden massive heart attack at the age of 50. The loss was devastating. She was left in a home presided over by a mother toward whom she had never felt close with. As her early life continued, it became clear that there was little opportunity for her in the way of education. So at the age of 16, she dropped out of high school entirely. Shortly after leaving school, Gertrude married John Baniszewski, an 18-year-old originally from Youngsville, Pennsylvania. The couple would go on to have 4 children together named Paula, Stephanie, John Jr., and Marie. John later became a police officer with the Indianapolis Police Department, a fact that carries a grim irony given the events that would unfold decades later under his wife's roof. The marriage was far from stable. John had a volatile temper and physically beat Gertrude on multiple occasions. Gertrude bore the weight of managing the household and the children largely on her own, while also absorbing the physical and emotional consequences of her husband's anger. Despite this sustained pattern, the two remained married for approximately 10 years before their first divorce, resulting in Gertrude taking the children. Within a year of that divorce, Gertrude married again, this time to a man named Edward Guthrie. The marriage lasted only 3 months. Guthrie grew tired of having her children in the home and divorced her, leaving her once again as a single mother. Shortly after, she and John reconciled and remarried. This second attempt lasted approximately 7 years and produced 2 more children named Shirley and James. But the reconciliation offered no real improvement in the fundamental dynamics of the household. John continued abusing the household, and the couple divorced for a second and final time in 1963. By this point, Gertrude was in her mid-30s, had 6 children, no regular income, and no real support system. Shortly after the second divorce from John, Gertrude began a relationship with a 20-year-old welder named Dennis Lee Wright. Wright was more than 15 years younger, and the relationship followed the same pattern as her previous relationships. Wright physically abused Gertrude, reportedly sending her to the hospital on at least 2 occasions during their time together. She also became pregnant with Wright twice. The first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, which some accounts suggest may have been the result of a physical assault by Wright. The second pregnancy resulted in the birth of a son named Dennis Jr. in May 1964. Shortly after the baby's birth, Dennis abandoned Gertrude and the child entirely. He offered almost no financial support thereafter. Gertrude filed a paternity suit in an effort to secure child support, but it yielded very little. In total, Gertrude had been pregnant 13 times, with 6 miscarriages and 7 children. By early 1965, Gertrude was 36 years old and living at 3850 East New York Street in Indianapolis, a rental house for which she paid $55 per month. Though she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, she weighed only 100 pounds. She also suffered from asthma, bronchitis, anxiety, and was almost certainly experiencing untreated clinical depression. Her financial situation was also desperate. The sporadic child support payments she received from her first ex-husband, who remained her primary source of financial support, were inconsistent and wholly insufficient to support 7 children. To supplement this, she took in ironing and sewing for neighbors and occasionally cleaned houses for acquaintances. As you likely suspect, Gertrude's living conditions were poor. Her residence had no functioning stove, only enough beds for roughly half the people living there, and enough plates and utensils for 3 people. The pantry was largely bare, stocked primarily with bread and crackers. Surfaces in the home were described as caked with thick layers of accumulated grime. Gertrude had begun presenting herself to the wider neighborhood as Mrs. Wright, claiming Dennis abandoned her in order to maintain an appearance of respectability. By now, her youngest child was a year old, while the eldest was 17, and it's here where I want to introduce another key individual in this story. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3rd, 1949 in Indiana. She was the third of 5 children born to Lester and his wife Elizabeth. Both parents worked as concessionaires, traveling across Indiana and beyond during the summer months, operating food and candy stands at county fairs and traveling carnivals. Sylvia's younger sister Jenny, born February 13th, 1950, had contracted polio as an infant. The disease weakened one of Jenny's legs significantly, required her to wear a steel leg brace, and left her with a limp that affected her mobility for life. She was notably more timid and introverted than Sylvia, and the two sisters were extremely close, with Sylvia acting almost like her protector. The Likens family was also plagued by financial strain and instability. Lester had only an 8th grade education and had worked a series of odd jobs over the years before settling into concession work. He was regarded by those who knew him as a genuinely hardworking man who did his best within the limitations of his circumstances. He and Elizabeth separated and reconciled multiple times, creating a structure around the children that was never fully settled. Due to the nomadic nature of their work, Sylvia and Jenny were routinely left behind when the family traveled. The boys in the family, Daniel and Benny, typically traveled with their parents to assist them. Sylvia was, by every account, a warm and outwardly cheerful teenager. She was described as friendly, confident, and lively. Despite that, she was immensely self-conscious about her missing front tooth, often leading her to smile with her lips closed in photographs. In the spring of 1965, the family had been living in California. It was during this time that Sylvia had briefly met and spent time with a boy going skating and visiting a beach park. By June of that same year, the family had returned to Indianapolis. On July 3rd, Elizabeth was arrested and subsequently jailed on a shoplifting charge. The arrest sent the family into a crisis as carnival season was approaching and the couple was set to leave for work. With Betty temporarily incarcerated and Lester needing to resume work, the question of who would care for Sylvia and Jenny became urgent. This is where Gertrude ultimately gets involved. Earlier that summer, Gertrude's 17-year-old daughter Paula had been out with a friend named Darlene McGuire when she was introduced to Sylvia and Jenny in the neighborhood. Paula brought the two girls back to her home, where they spent time drinking sodas and listening to records with Paula's siblings. When Paula learned that Sylvia's mother was in jail, she offered to let her and Jenny spend the night. The next day, Lester learned that his daughters had stayed at someone else's house and arranged to pick them up. When he arrived, Gertrude introduced herself to Lester as Mrs. Wright. The two began talking, and over the course of this conversation, the idea of a formal boarding arrangement emerged. Whether the suggestion came from Lester or from Gertrude is unclear. What is documented is that Lester agreed to leave his two daughters in Gertrude's care for $20 per week, with the understanding that the arrangement would last through the summer and into the fall until the family returned to Indianapolis in November. Gertrude assured Lester that she would care for the girls as though they were her own children. Lester never inspected the house before leaving his daughters there. Had he done so, he likely would have become seriously concerned about the conditions of the property. Approximately 2 weeks after Sylvia and Jenny moved in with Gertrude, the arrangement seemed stable enough. The first payment had arrived on time, and things had proceeded without incident. But when the second payment failed to show up on the expected date, delayed by only a day or two, something snapped inside Gertrude. She summoned Sylvia and Jenny and, in a rage, screamed at them saying, "I took care of you two little scum for a week for nothing." She then ordered both girls to lie face down across her bed with their clothes removed. Using a wooden paddle, she beat both girls across their bare buttocks. It was the first act of physical violence the girls had experienced in the house, and they had no reason to suspect that Gertrude was a violent person, so it came as incredibly shocking. When Lester and Elizabeth returned shortly afterward to check on the girls, neither Sylvia nor Jenny said a word about the beating. Gertrude was present throughout the couple's visit, and both girls almost certainly understood the potential consequences of exposing Gertrude. Gertrude. Their parents left satisfied that everything was fine. The second incident arrived soon after. Sylvia and Jenny had gone through the neighborhood collecting discarded Coca-Cola bottles which could be exchanged for a few cents and used the money to buy candy. When they returned home, Gertrude immediately accused Sylvia of stealing. She calmly explained exactly how she had obtained the money, but Gertrude accused her of lying. Sylvia was again ordered to bend over the bed and was again beaten with the paddle. The third incident occurred outside the house. Gertrude's children attended a church function and, upon returning home, reported to Gertrude that they had been embarrassed by how much food they had seen Sylvia eat at the gathering. Gertrude accepted the complaint immediately as if Sylvia had committed a major crime, stating that she knew she was no good. She called both girls back and struck each one 15 times across their backs with the same paddle. By mid-August, Gertrude had begun restricting Sylvia's access to normal meals. She began accusing her of eating too much and excluded her from sitting at the family table. When Sylvia was fed, it was only on Gertrude's terms, sometimes with spoiled food, sometimes with garbage. On one particular occasion, as the family sat down to dinner, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Lepper seized Sylvia and force-fed her a hot dog piled with excessive amounts of mustard, spices, and condiments. When Sylvia vomited from the event, she was forced to consume what she had spat out. It should be noted that in this incident in particular, neither Randy nor Paula was forced into doing this. They had participated willingly. This is the first evidence of Gertrude actively coordinating others in the abuse. Another major development would occur from a casual conversation Sylvia had. She had been talking to the girls in the house about her life in California earlier that spring. She mentioned that she had a boyfriend in Long Beach. Gertrude heard this and pressed further, asking if she had done anything with the boy. Sylvia, not truly understanding the meaning of the question, replied, "I guess so," and innocently elaborated on their time skating together. Several days later, Gertrude returned to the subject without warning. She told Sylvia in front of the other girls in the house, "You're certainly getting big in the stomach, Sylvia. It looks like you're going to have a baby." Sylvia thought Gertrude was joking and lightly replied, "Yeah, it sure is getting big. I'm just going to have to go on a diet." Gertrude didn't laugh. She gathered the girls and said whenever a girl did something with a boy, the result was always a pregnancy. She then turned to Sylvia and kicked her in her crotch. Paula, who was herself 3 months pregnant at this point and had long displayed jealousy towards Sylvia's physical appearance, immediately joined in, knocking Sylvia off her chair and onto the kitchen floor while shouting, "You ain't fit to sit in a chair." From that moment, Gertrude denied Sylvia the ability to sit in a chair unless asked for permission. She would continue to use this twisted narrative of Sylvia being defiled to justify future punishments. In what was later established as her only act of retaliation against the household, Sylvia, along with Jenny, allegedly spread a rumor at school that Paula and Stephanie, one of Gertrude's other daughters, were selling their bodies. When Coy Hubbard, Stephanie's boyfriend, learned of the rumor, he went to Gertrude's house and beat Sylvia viciously. Gertrude, upon learning of the rumor, then administered her own beating with a paddle. Stephanie confronted Sylvia directly. Sylvia apologized in tears, and Stephanie, in what may be one of the few humane moments in this account, also began to cry. The two briefly comforted one another, but when Gertrude heard of this, she used it as yet another basis for violence against Sylvia. From this point forward, Coy Hubbard visited the home regularly after encouragement from Gertrude. She even began instructing him to use Sylvia as a judo practice target, flipping her, throwing her, and slapping her. On some occasions, Hubbard would even bring classmates to participate as well. On one occasion, Paula hit Sylvia across the face with such force that she broke her own wrist against Sylvia's jaw. The injury required Paula to wear a cast, but it did not stop the beatings. Paula used the hardened cast itself to continue hitting Sylvia in the days and weeks that followed. Gertrude had by this point obtained a 3-inch wide police belt and began using it as her preferred instrument for whipping Sylvia. On one occasion, after Sylvia admitted to stealing a gym suit from school because Gertrude had refused to purchase one for her, Gertrude beat her repeatedly with the belt while simultaneously delivering a lecture on the evils of premarital intercourse. Stephanie unusually shouted in Sylvia's defense, "She didn't do anything." Gertrude ignored her and continued. After the whipping, she burned each of Sylvia's fingertips with lit cigarette matches, pressing the flame against them one by one. A few days later, when Jenny allegedly stole a single tennis shoe from school so she could wear it on her stronger polio-affected foot, Gertrude beat Jenny with the same belt. At some point, Gertrude extended the abuse further, approaching Sylvia's best friend named Anna and claiming that Sylvia had been spreading rumors about Anna's mother being an escort. Gertrude brought Anna to confront Sylvia about this matter and encouraged her to physically attack her. Anna, believing the lie, followed along. Gertrude then repeated a similar tactic with Judy Duke, one of Paula's friends. She told Judy that Sylvia had been spreading vile rumors about Judy's mother and pitted the girls against one another in a fist fight, with Gertrude watching from the side. At one point during a separate incident, Gertrude ordered Jenny to punch Sylvia in front of the assembled group. When Jenny refused, Gertrude beat Jenny in the face until Jenny finally struck her sister. Neighborhood children were charged 5 cents apiece to come to the house and view Sylvia's body, to beat her, to humiliate her, or to push her down the basement stairs. Over 100 cigarette burns were later counted on Sylvia's body. Gertrude also periodically had Sylvia dragged to the bathtub, where she was submerged in scalding hot water. After the baths, Paula would rub handfuls of salt directly into Sylvia's open wounds and raw, damaged skin. Another key incident occurred around early September when Gertrude forced Sylvia to take off her clothes in front of her children, and several neighborhood boys. From there, she violated her body with various objects, including a glass soda bottle. That same month, Sylvia and Jenny encountered their older sister Diana at a local park. Both girls told her what was happening, but neither girl was able to give her the exact address of the house. Diana, not yet understanding the severity of what she was hearing, initially dismissed what her sister said as exaggeration and brushed it off. Weeks later, Gertrude's 11-year-old daughter Marie revealed to her family that she had seen Sylvia eating a sandwich that Diana had given her in the park earlier that day. Gertrude accused Sylvia of gluttony. She and Paula then choked and bludgeoned Sylvia before subjecting her to another scalding bath, repeatedly grabbing her hair and slamming her head against the bathtub rim, knocking her unconscious. When Diana eventually managed to locate the address and attempted to visit in October, Gertrude refused to let her enter the property. First, she claimed that Lester had given instructions not to allow Diana near the girls, then threatened to call the police and have her arrested for trespassing. Diana waited nearby until she spotted Jenny outside and approached her. Jenny, visibly afraid, told her older sister, "I can't tell you or I'll get into trouble," and ran away. Alarmed, Diana contacted social services. A public health worker was dispatched to the home, and Gertrude told the worker that Sylvia had been kicked out for being physically unclean and selling her body. Then, before the worker could speak with Jenny alone, Gertrude pulled Jenny aside and repeated her threat. If she told the truth, she'd be locked up and tortured in the basement with her sister. When the social worker spoke with Jenny, she confirmed Gertrude's story. A report was subsequently filed stating that no further action was needed at the home. Around the same period, the father of a neighborhood boy named Michael Monroe contacted Arsenal Technical High School anonymously to report that a girl with open sores across her entire body was living with Gertrude. A school nurse was dispatched to the address to investigate. Gertrude answered the door and told the nurse that Sylvia had run away from the home the previous week, that she had no idea where Sylvia currently was, and that the sores she had observed were caused by Sylvia's abysmal hygiene. She characterized Sylvia as out of control and a bad influence on the other children and on her own sister. The nurse left and the school did not investigate the matter further. During this period, Gertrude's Reverend Roy Julian visited the home as part of a program he conducted to visit each of his parishioners personally. Over coffee, Gertrude told the Reverend that Sylvia was an escort specializing with married men and had become pregnant. She insisted that Paula, who actually was pregnant, was a virgin and that Sylvia had been attempting to pass her nasty lifestyle on to the innocent Paula. The Reverend sat with Gertrude and prayed for Sylvia's salvation before departing. When he returned weeks later and Paula told him during prayers that she had, quote, hatred in her heart for Sylvia, Gertrude quickly interjected, saying that she was joking and didn't know what that phrase actually meant. By the first days of October, Sylvia's body had sustained such immense damage that she had become incontinent, meaning she was no longer able to control the release of urine or stool. Gertrude denied Sylvia access to all bathrooms, which only worsened the problem. When Sylvia wet herself, Gertrude treated it as disobedience and punished her accordingly. It was also in October when a 14-year-old named Richard Hobbs was introduced. Hobbs was labeled by many as Gertrude's personal assistant. He was an honor student from a middle-class family with no prior issues. But upon meeting Gertrude, something shifted in his personality. While not confirmed, many investigators speculated that Gertrude maintained a romantic relationship with Hobbs while she ordered him to carry out despicable acts against Sylvia. These orders in particular were said to have crossed thresholds that even most of Gertrude's own children often hesitated at. On October 22nd, John Jr., Gertrude's 12-year-old son, went to the basement where Sylvia was being held and offered her a bowl of soup. He told her she could eat it with her fingers if she wished. Sylvia, by this point suffering from such severe malnourishment that she may not have been physically capable of even consuming any food, reached for the bowl and John snatched it away. He offered it to her again before yanking it away once she reached out. He repeated this several times over before leaving. On October 23rd, Gertrude called Sylvia up from the basement to the kitchen. The conversation, according to later testimony from Hobbs, centered around tattoos. Gertrude told her, "You have branded my daughters. Now I am going to brand you." She tied Sylvia down and had a sewing needle heated over a series of matches until it glowed orange. Using the heated needle, Gertrude began carving the words, "I'm a prostitute, and I'm proud of it," into Sylvia's abdomen, letter by letter. Gertrude grew fatigued before she had finished the full phrase and handed the needle to Hobbs, directing him to complete it while she took Jenny to a nearby grocery store. Hobbs later testified that he made the letters in what he described as short, light etchings, but the physical evidence at autopsy told a different story. As he carved, Sylvia clenched her teeth and moaned but could not pull away. When the phrase was complete, Hobbs and 10-year-old Shirley took Sylvia to the basement to inflict a second branding. Using a heated anchor bolt, they attempted to burn the letter S on Sylvia's chest. One of the curves of the letter was applied incorrectly, creating what resembled the number 3. When it was over, Gertrude brought Sylvia back upstairs and taunted her, asking what she could possibly do now and that no one would ever want to marry her in her current state. Sylvia replied through tears, "I guess there's nothing I can do." Later that day, Gertrude forced Sylvia to display the carved words to neighborhood children, claiming she had received the inscription at a party. That night, she whispered to her sister Jenny, saying, "Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die. I can tell it." The next day, Gertrude woke Sylvia and ordered her to write a letter. The letter was addressed to her own parents, but instead of referring to her as mother and father, she called them Mrs. and Mr. Likens. The letter said, "I went with a gang of boys in the middle of the night, and they said that they would pay me if I would give them something. So I got in the car and they all got what they wanted. When they got finished, they beat me up and left sores on my face and all over my body, and they also put words on my stomach. I have done just about everything that I could do just to make Gertie mad and cause Gertie more money than she's got. I've tore up a new mattress and peed on it. I have also cost her medical bills that she really can't pay and made Gertie a nervous wreck and all her kids." After the letter was completed, Gertrude began the next steps of her plan. She would have John Jr. and Jenny blindfold Sylvia, take her to a nearby wooded area known as Jimmy's Forest, and leave her there to die. Shortly after writing the letter, Sylvia was tied to the stair railing again and offered crackers to eat. She refused them, saying, "Give it to the dog, I don't want it." Gertrude forced the crackers into her mouth anyway, then beat her, calling in John Jr. to do the same. Then on October 25th, Sylvia made a decision to try and escape. She moved toward the front door. She was unable to move quickly. In her emaciated and mutilated state, her legs could barely carry her at a normal walking pace. Gertrude caught her before she could clear the door and dragged her back into the house. Once inside, she tried to hand Sylvia more crackers, but Sylvia was physically unable to swallow them. Gertrude forced the crackers into her mouth, then beat her repeatedly with a curtain rod until sections of it bent into right angles from the force. Coy Hubbard then took the bent rod from Gertrude and struck Sylvia a final time, knocking her unconscious. Gertrude dragged her limp body back to the basement. That night, Sylvia beat the basement walls with a spade and screamed for help. Her screams were loud enough to be heard by the next-door neighbors. One of the neighbors later told police that she had heard the commotion, had identified it as coming from the basement in a house next door, but that because the noise stopped around 3 in the morning, she had decided not to call the police. She went back to sleep, and Sylvia never received help. Later that morning, Sylvia could no longer speak clearly or control her limbs. Gertrude brought her to the kitchen and tried to feed her a donut and a glass of milk, but when Sylvia failed to bring the glass to her lips, Gertrude threw her to the floor and returned her to the basement. Sylvia quickly fell into delirium, babbling and moaning incoherently. That afternoon, Hobbs arrived and went to the basement where he found Stephanie sobbing and cradling Sylvia's body. Hobbs and Stephanie cleaned Sylvia, gave her a warm bath, dressed her, and laid her on a mattress in an upstairs bedroom. Sylvia's last words, barely audible, were that she wished her dad were there and asked Stephanie to take her home. Stephanie attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation after realizing Sylvia was no longer breathing. Gertrude, meanwhile, shouted at the children that Sylvia was faking, when in reality, she had finally passed away. When Gertrude confirmed Sylvia was dead, she reportedly struck the corpse with a book and screamed "faker" over and over before ordering Hobbs to call the police from a nearby payphone. Police received the call at approximately 6:30 p.m. When officers arrived, Gertrude attempted to hand them the fabricated letter she had forced Sylvia to write and told them Sylvia had run off with a group of boys, returning later that afternoon beaten and without clothes. She claimed she had been attempting to resuscitate Sylvia for over an hour before she died. Officers found the body lying on a soiled mattress covered with more than 150 individual wounds. The official cause of death was a subdural hematoma from a blow to the right temple, with acute malnutrition and shock from extensive skin damage listed as contributing factors. As police began processing the scene, Jenny approached an officer and whispered, "You get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." Within hours, Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr., along with Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were taken into custody on preliminary murder charges. The younger children were placed in separate foster homes. By October 27th, Gertrude had partially confessed to police, acknowledging that she knew Paula and Hubbard had abused Sylvia, deflecting blame onto them. She said, "Paula did most of the damage and Hubbard did a lot of the beating." Paula signed a statement admitting to multiple acts of violence, including breaking her wrist on Sylvia's jaw and repeatedly striking her with a police belt. John Jr. also admitted to hitting Sylvia and burning her with matches. 2 days later, 5 additional neighborhood children were also detained for their roles in the abuse. They were subsequently released into parental custody under a summons to testify. In December, a grand jury issued first-degree murder indictments against Gertrude, her children Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr., as well as Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs. The charges against the younger neighborhood children were downgraded and they were released under subpoena as state witnesses. On May 19, 1966, the previously named individuals were all found guilty and received varied sentences. Gertrude and Paula both got life imprisonment, while the other 3 got sentences lasting up to 21 years. John Jr., Hubbard, and Hobbs were all released on parole on February 27, 1968, having served less than 2 years. Hobbs struggled deeply after his release. He suffered at least one nervous breakdown and died of lung cancer on January 2, 1972, at the age of 21, just 4 years after leaving prison. John Jr., who later changed his name to John Blake, expressed remorse for his actions, something no other participant was reported to have done. He became a lay minister, hosted counseling sessions for children of divorced parents, and on one occasion publicly stated that he and his co-defendants deserved harsher sentences. He died of diabetes on May 19, 2005, at the age of 52. In September 1970, the Indiana Supreme Court overturned the first-degree murder convictions of both Gertrude and Paula. The court found that trial judge Saul Isaac Rabb had repeatedly and improperly denied defense motions for a change of venue and separate trials, given the overwhelming media saturation in Indianapolis. In 1971, both women were retried. Paula chose to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter rather than face a full retrial. She was paroled in December 1972 and fully released in 1974. She changed her name to Paula Pace, eventually settled in Iowa, and worked for 14 years as an assistant to a school counselor. In 2012, her true identity was discovered and she was fired for providing false information on her employment application. Gertrude, however, was again sentenced to life imprisonment. At the Indiana Women's Prison, Gertrude proved to be a model inmate. She worked in the sewing shop, served as an informal den mother to younger female inmates, and earned the nickname Mom among the population. She converted to Christianity and, by the time of her parole hearing, presented herself as a devout believer who had transformed her life. In 1985, the parole board took up Gertrude's case. The prospect of her release triggered massive public opposition. Over the course of 2 months, 40,000 signatures were gathered on a petition demanding that Gertrude remain incarcerated for life. Jenny Likens and other members of the family appeared at the hearing to oppose the release. During the hearing, Gertrude acknowledged that she wished Sylvia's death could be undone, but significantly downplayed her own responsibility, attributing her actions to the asthma medication she had been taking. She said, "I'm not sure what involvement I had in her death because I was high." She never accepted full responsibility for the prolonged torture and death of Sylvia. Despite public opposition, the parole board voted to release her based on her exemplary prison conduct. On December 4th, 1985, Gertrude walked out of prison after 20 years of incarceration. She was the last of the major defendants to be released. She changed her legal name to Nadine Van Fossen, moved to Laurel, Iowa, and lived quietly. She maintained that she could not accurately remember her actions during the period of Sylvia's abuse. Then, in June of 1990, she died of lung cancer at the age of 61. When Jenny saw Gertrude's obituary in a newspaper, she cut it out and mailed it to her mother with a handwritten note saying, "Some positive news. Gertrude passed away. That makes me pleased." As for Sylvia's parents, there is not much information available regarding their actions after the event. Lester died at 86 in 2013, while Elizabeth died in 1998 at 71. The two divorced back in 1967. As for Jenny, she later married and had 2 children. She struggled with anxiety and was dependent on medication for the rest of her life. Jenny consistently maintained that neither parent should be blamed for placing the girls with Gertrude. Jenny died of a heart attack on June 23, 2004 in Indiana at the age of 54. Stephanie, who turned state's evidence and had her charges dropped, changed her name, married, became a school teacher, had children, and reportedly settled in Florida. The home at 3850 East New York Street stood vacant for decades after the crime and gradually deteriorated. Plans to convert it into a women's shelter never secured the necessary funding, and the structure was demolished on April 23, 2009 before becoming a church parking lot.